Hello there, my name is Couch Cooper. We are looking at the decade's best games. 2011 to 2021. Skyrim came out on the 11th of the 11th of the 11th. Don't remember any of that, but I do remember Dark Souls coming out. Dark Souls only got 8.5 on Metacritic. Elder Scrolls is at the top there. Portal 2 came out that year. It was a busy year. Rayman Legends, good versus evil. So interesting. But more interesting is how big an impact Skyrim had on the industry afterwards. And of course, we're up to 10 years without a whiff of a sequel. Obviously, Elder Scrolls Online has probably taken up a lot of Bethesda's time. And of course, we've got that new Stargate Rift thing that Tom's promising us. God only knows what that's going to be like. Let's hope it's not Fallout 76 in space. And of course, I did buy Dark Souls before getting Skyrim because I kind of had played previous Skyrim games. I knew what Oblivion was all about. Dark Souls was very new and it just looked raw and dangerous and difficult. All of the above it was. But we have a few From Software games on this list. I don't want to oversaturate it. I want to give Bethesda a turn, and they get a great opportunity here for 2011. I do want to cover that we are looking at the PlayStation improved version of this game, and get this, all of these games, all 10 are being played on my PlayStation 5 bar one. So interesting, the list isn't exclusive, but we do certainly have a lot of Sony or Sony-based titles on here. No exclusive Sony titles. I want to keep the list as cross-platform as possible, but that might ring some alarm bells with some of you fanboys going forward. I'd also like to mention to anybody who's never really clapped eyes on this particular game, it's kind of the ultimate role-playing sword and sorcery franchise out there. It is truly open world with the dynamic weather system and sort of ad hoc encounters. Elder Scrolls V Skyrim. Okay, let's get started with 2012, and we had a hell of a year. Mass Effect 3, Borderlands 2, which I'm really surprised I didn't put in this slot. Really loads going on in the industry. XCOM came out over on PC. It was kicking off big time. I'm hit! I did go with Far Cry 3, and there's a number of reasons for that. It was kind of the first in the Far Cry series that got my head turning and really got me to focus on what this game was trying to say to its audience. I think it had one of the deepest stories of all of the Far Cry games, and of course we've seen nothing but a tapering off of quality and new ideas since Far Cry 3 came out. They've even dug up Vaas the villain, push him out on paid DLC for Far Cry 6. So that's why I look at this game in a sort of new light. And of course it had a little bit of a makeover for the last gen systems, and it's still got that crazy physics and that stunning turquoise on green that we saw with the island's visuals. I totally get it if Mass Effect 3 was just stand out, but that ending rubbed a lot of people up the wrong way. This was kind of a perfect package. Far Cry 3. Over to 2013, and it is of course Grand Theft Auto 5, the biggest release of that year by a long stretch. September, I will never forget it. We saw a re-release on the last gen consoles. Just about over a year after that release, they made us put our hands in our pockets again for an improved version of the game, and they're going to make us do it again for the current gen systems. I'm going to be seriously scratching my head on that one. We had Bioshock Infinite for that year, which wasn't the strongest of the three Bioshocks as far as I was concerned. We had Diablo 3, which as a couch co-oper kind of should be on this slot, but I want to keep it single player, high budget. Rockstar don't get a mention on this list other than this game. I remember the actual day I fired it up because I had to get a 360 in and get the game to look at it. I'd kind of been on a bit of a gaming hiatus at that point. I hadn't really sat down with my own console for about 5 to 10 years, and it was GTA 5 that kind of put me back into the industry again, and I haven't really looked back since, so bit of a big one for me. Grand Theft Auto 5. 2014, not the simplest of years, because of course sitting at the top there is the remaster of Grand Theft Auto 5, but we did have Shadow of Mordor, one of the better Lord of the Rings games, and of course we had Titanfall, which really does fall back on its multiplayer. It's an okay campaign, but Sunset Overdrive, it being over exclusively on the Xbox and Microsoft side for all of that time, and it being one of the most enjoyable third-person ARPGs I've ever played, does boast a beautiful open world system, a classic timeless art style and story. It's unbeatable, this, and doesn't get recognised enough because of its exclusivity. So many Sony fanboys have never clapped eyes on this, and it breaks my heart. It's also sitting on Game Pass, and it also runs like a goddamn peach on just about every system now because it's getting on a little bit. You can have the settings on full blast and it's so smooth, and it just loves getting busy. That's what gobsmacked me about this game when I first saw it, was just how relentless it is with its moving parts and the freedom that traversal mechanic gives you. You might be watching this list thinking, what the hell has he put this on here for? There's two things. You've either not played it or you haven't had a good look at that 2014 list, because this is the most innovative, colourful, joyful game of that year by a long stretch. Sunset Overdrive. "2015, another very strange year. There's GTA sitting at the top again because it got released on PC. And of course we saw the launch of The Witcher 3 on a number of different platforms. The Wild Hunt was probably the biggest named game to launch out on the market for that year, and of course the best performing, and it completely swept me in. I was obsessed with this for about 3.5 months, bought both DLCs. And isn't it strange how our perceptions have changed of developers since the start of the decade? You're looking at Bethesda and you look at BioWare and you look at CDPR, and things are not how they used to be. I think The Witcher 3 could be the biggest labour of love in the video game industry against its source material. I'm talking about those amazing books and the amount of time the team took to embed amazing side quests and different character development storylines that led to all kinds of really cool loot rewards or different discounts in village trade shops, even cool new Gwent cards, which was the minigame that got its own game. This is vastly superior to Skyrim visually. Whether or not it's bigger on detail and what there is to do in that world is another kettle of fish, but of course this is a lot later in graphical development, so it reaps those rewards massively. And of course we are looking at the PlayStation 5 patch version.
Why is that, Grandpa?
Have CDPR expressed any sort of movement towards pushing this game further with its sequels? There are no rumours massively of anything coming out of the Witcher series on console for a while, and of course they always normally release the games on PC first, but all that's changed since the old CP debacle. One of the few weaknesses pointed out by a lot of other people with this game is the combat, and I actually don't have a huge issue with it. It's not a focal setup, you just wail in the direction that you're kind of facing, a bit like Ghost of Tsushima. But it does have a certain amount of satisfaction. It's not precision, and I really enjoy it. Of course, the mixing in of the magic and the massive amount of loot and different weapon types and runes that you put into your swords is kind of mind-blowing, and they all glow a particularly cool colour depending on what you slot it in. It does chug a little bit, and you do notice that it's at 1080 in certain areas. There's some very grainy sections of the screen, which kind of points to the super sampling and anti-aliasing techniques that they're using, but it's an incredible looking game. The frames will dip a little bit, and it is quite obvious that this is not a true current gen edition of the game. I think it's pretty safe for me to say for 2015, The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt totally smashed it. 2016, March 24th, Dark Souls 3 came out. Didn't make it at the top of that Metacritic list. It was kind of all of the best of From Software's experience with developing an ARPG like that, refining those techniques, giving it such a beautiful last-gen look, and then just pumping loads more into that world. It was quite an incredible third installation. I'm trying to think of other games that have given us that much on their third attempt. I know I'm going to get burnt alive in the comments for not having Uncharted 4 in this slot, but the Uncharted games I think are wonderful. I'm just very particular with the Souls idea, and of course From giving more to a series that really is one of the most industry's famous now. And of course Bloodborne's not on this list because I just didn't want to populate it with loads of hard third-person ARPGs, which is basically what this list is turning into, you know, combat-heavy third-person ARPGs. What's your point? Elden Ring is obviously going to smash it. I don't know if From are done with the Dark Souls series. Of course they're not. It's way too much of a cash cow for them to put that in the bin. But I think we'll start seeing Elden everywhere. And this will kind of be left in the avenues of history. Because of how massive a game Bloodborne was, and because of how huge a groundbreaker Dark Souls 1 was, I think that the third installation kind of gets overlooked in areas. And of course, we are looking at the PlayStation 5 improved patch. "2017 wasn't too tough a year for me to make a decision on my top game. Obviously, Horizon Zero Dawn smashed it, but of course we had Breath of the Wild for that year over on the Switch and the Wii U, released on dual platform. They are both actually very similar games, but of course Horizon Zero Dawn is a goddamned graphical mammoth and an open world revolution. It's absolutely sensational and will always be in my back catalogue as a groundbreaker. It's had a massive second coming, obviously, because of that PlayStation 5 patch that we got given about 3.5 months ago. Put those graphics that were already on a top shelf to an unbelievable level. I'm talking PEG 60, a near on 4K, and just stunning HDR implementation. The game was animated and sort of landscaped on a huge scale in the first place, so you can imagine how welcome this graphical addition is, because it's very action heavy, and of course it's 4 years old and none of these mechanics seem dated. Of course loads of them, especially the on the fly crafting, have been used everywhere since. Its sequel is coming out in February of 2022, and from what we've seen of it, it's kind of looking like the best thing I've ever seen in my life. The cutscene graphics and the in-game graphics are totally indistinguishable. I know it's trailer heavy, but man, that could blow our minds. We have to wait a while, but of course I'm holding out for that one. Guerrilla as a studio have kind of sort of done the right thing with the Horizon franchise by giving a really massive substantial piece of DLC in the form of the Frozen Wilds, with a very new area, new robots, monsters, even new mounts and weapons. It was a stellar piece of DLC there, only to be equaled by some of the stuff that From did for Dark Souls 2 and 1 and even Bloodborne. They also didn't spread themselves too thin with coming out of multiple IPs after the success of Horizon Zero Dawn. They overstretched themselves with Rigs, which was a bit devastating. That was a VR title that involved getting into massive robots. I think it was well ahead of its time. They actually closed down that studio, so they've streamlined. They are obviously focusing on the new Horizon game, which just makes me feel a lot better about the situation. Sony keeping them under their wing as a studio as well is a very good idea, because they obviously know what they're doing, and this franchise is not going anywhere and is only going to get larger. I'm talking Netflix. I'd be very keen to hear what you guys think about 2017 as a gaming year. I know I may have not looked at some of the titles as closely as I could have done, thus putting them a bit further away from the top. So Horizon Zero Dawn is going to sit there. 2018's coming up. That one was the tough one. Alright, so I've been thinking a lot about 2018. I did 4 reviews of that year for Game of the Year because it was such a colossal PlayStation 4 year. We had God of War come out, we had Red Dead Redemption come out, and we had Monster Hunter World available. I was extremely busy. I barely got enough time to even cover those 3 games in their entirety, mainly because I ended up pumping 1,000 hours into Monster Hunter World, and that's what I'm going to judge this year on, I think. I'm still playing the campaign of Red Dead Redemption 2. That's a testament to the game's speed. It's not really fair, but I don't put enough hours into it. I got into the online multiplayer. It is a Rockstar gem, and it is one of the most important games of the decade. But I'm going to put World on because I had so much fun with it on a single player level. It gave me so much joy, and as a port for the franchise to go on to these bigger machines and for the whole thing to just look different, man, it was a worry. I'll never forget the date of 26th of January. Few dates stick in my mind for game releases. The 26th of Jan 2018 was one of them. It's also massively trenched in deep ARPG mechanics, some of which these mechanics are now getting on to 10 plus years old, and most of these mechanics have actually been pinched a little bit by a lot of similar games within this genre. Monster Hunter offered a stationary health-taking mechanic in its early versions, and I got caught trying to do the wire bug so many times during this footage. Going back to Monster Hunter World after goddamn Rise is a bit of a task for me now. But its ability to still impress, and how it grabbed the current gen systems to improve its performance after the patches came through, was so welcome. It is such a pretty game to see it operating at full frames and to not have any screen tear and have those graphic options both on and offline. This game is a massive winner. I'm sorry God of War, and I'm sorry Red Dead Redemption. I suppose I really should eat a little bit of humble pie with this, because my journey with Sekiro was not a simple one. I was initially put off by it because of its lack of loot and weapon variation, but then got put back onto it because of its amazing boss fights, feudal Japan, and it's blatantly a very strong From Software game with some cracking additions to the combat mechanics, which involve deflection and parrying and posture. It's pretty damned amazing. 2009 was a relatively Capcom strong one. The Resident Evil 2 remake, the Devil May Cry 5 came out, and neither of them did massively well. I think that remake of Resident Evil was probably the strongest, but again, it's a remake. I'm after new IPs, fresh ideas, and they don't come more fresh than Sekiro. From Software clearly demonstrate an ability to venture out of their comfort zone with a lot of their game mechanics, and I think Elden Ring, both being open world and by the looks of it having some tweaks on that front, is going to change things up big time again for fans who were used to that similar system we've been seeing the whole way through the Dark Souls games, massive amounts of it in Bloodborne, and of course sprinkles of it in Sekiro. And that's what put a lot of the bigger fan base off, is that it was just so different to play. But in hindsight, and looking at 2019, this thing's a pillar on a quite flat landscape. And it does have variation. It's just not as in your face as a lot of modern games are. Your cosmetics don't change at all, but your fighting style does. And a lot of the reward is in the bosses and how they push back, how they differ, and how large an arena you get put in with some of them. That Guardian Ape could be one of the best boss fights I've ever experienced in a third-person ARPG. 2019 was definitely Sekiro Shadows Die Twice's year. Okay, Ghost of Tsushima comes in for 2020 Game of the Year, obviously, one across the board, but it went up against The Last of Us Part 2 for me, and I don't think we all need to sit down and chinwag about what went on there, and of course, we all know my preferences by now, with a sword-wielding third-person ARPG set in feudal Japan is basically 90% of what I'm looking for in a video game.
Are you cowards?
Also, a casual observer would be like, hold on, this is just like the previous game you showed us, and isn't that incredible how vastly different these games actually are? But from the sidelines you'd think they were completely identical, bar the horse obviously. The fighting style within GOT is totally refreshing because there's no focus, it's kind of quite ad hoc, and you can link up combos and start becoming this complete badass. I think the guys at Sucker Punch, they knew what they were doing with games like Infamous 1 and 2, and they've only built on that more. But the feudal Japan map, or the way the Japanese landscape looks during this era, is unforgettable, and it is just going to go down in history as such a great homage. Just like some of the bigger games on this list, the studio had focus. They didn't have too many plates spinning, and they weren't worried about microtransactions or making it always online. This is where true gaming really exists in my eyes, is that dedicated, single-player, story-driven, action-focused ARPG. It's 2 A's. PG. Extra content is everywhere within this canon. You've got that new island, you've got the free co-op mode, which nearly knocked me on my ass when I realised how excellent that is and how much of a need there was for something like that in a game that I felt was totally awesome on my own. There is one thing they annoyed me with, and that's the Director's Cut version being completely full-blown price. And as a PlayStation 5 owner, we've actually been really spoiled and lucky. Games like No Man's Sky, games like Nier 2 have offered us full-blown upgrades for no cost whatsoever. And the footage you're looking at is your standard PlayStation 4 pumped version on the 5. This isn't the Director's Cut. I feel like I've only just bought this game. To go and buy it again at full price, I'll hang back a bit on that one. GOT deserved all the awards it got in 2019, and I can't wait for Sucker Punch to give us more. Talking of being Sucker Punched, he's gone and put a PlayStation 5 exclusive at number 1. It's technically not number 1, is it? It's the best game for 2021, and I've already expressed those ideas. By the way, that segue, skill up, you will never get to that greatness. I kind of went through a full-blown journey with this game, ranging from extreme hate to it being my favourite piece of software for the entire year. Housemarque are what I call a legacy developer, i.e. they've been around since I was a kid. There's only a few of them left, Team 17 being one of them, and it's just a joy to see them come to fruition on the current gen system, plural, not, and looking fantastic. Uses the pad brilliantly. It's so damn hard though, and it's got a roguelike structure which is tilting towards a really difficult roguelike structure. It's not like your indie rogues where you get given stuff back for dying loads. This game is hardcore. You do, however, completely learn to love it, and all the comments from my videos about the patch reviews and my journey to that first boss, so supportive. Such a great bunch of people are into this game. Was it a system seller for the PlayStation 5? Well, for me, it kind of was, because I knew about this game's structure, and I'm kind of the perfect demographic. Anyone who remembers Housemarque, I think, or who is into this style of die-hard third-person shoot-'em-up, and I think that the speed of this game and its colours and the amount of stuff they have going on with the particles and the light, even though it's not 4K, it does run at a beautiful PEG 60. It's one of the most stunning games you will clap eyes on for this year. I thoroughly recommend you do it. And of course, I've been Couch Coop, and I'll see you down there.